Hey, what's going on everyone? It's Stranger and welcome to another YouTube music production video where my mission is to help you succeed in making music. So if you've been at it with music production for a while now, then you must have a bunch of plugins. And you may be getting plugin fatigue. There's just so many plugins out there, and frankly, a lot of them just do the same thing. However, every once in a while, we'll come across a plugin that does something unique, and Devious Machines Texture does just that. Now, full disclosure, Devious Machines did approach me to do this video. However, I do have full creative control, and I will be honest with you guys. Now, is texture something you absolutely need? No. However, is it something that could open up new creative possibilities and take your sound to a new level? Well, yes. Essentially, what texture does is it intuitively layers your sound with a variety of textures from its library, from noisescapes to synth sounds and reverb tails. You can even import your own sounds into the sampler, and there's a granular synth engine, filter and dynamic controls to really help you manipulate your sound. So I'm going to be using texture across a variety of sounds in my track to make certain sounds come alive and make other sounds more interesting. And if you're interested in using texture, you can grab it down in the link below. They're kind enough to provide a nice discount just for you guys. And comment down below and let me know what other plugins you'd like to see in future videos. Make sure you hit the like, subscribe, and share buttons if you want to support my channel. Alright, without further ado, let's get right into it. Alright, so I have this project here, and here's a kick pattern I have. It's just a basic kick. And now I'm going to add texture over the kick. Now, just to show you what this can do, I'm just going to go through a couple of its presets. I'll start with the bass adders. So these add a lower frequency to your sample. So I can see this being useful when you have a sound that you need some additional bass underneath. So here's some vinyl crackle, and this adds a bit of grit to your kick. I like this subtle crackle. It makes the kick sound a little more dirtier. This adds a little hi-hat on top, adds a bit of attack to it. Alright, so let's build our own sound with this. So I'm going to start with a fresh default. So over on the left here is where you can browse through the different textural sounds. So I'm going to choose the spooky reverb. So this adds a texture on top of the sample. Now click over into the dynamic section, and this is where you can see how the envelope behaves. So essentially what happens is it catches every time the kick hits, and then it plays the texture. Now you can adjust the decay of the sample. I like how it adds some ambiance to the kick without making the kick sound muddy, and that's pretty key. Now you can pitch up that layer. You can also filter that sound on the bottom left here. It reminds me of some of those dub physics kicks. Now watch what happens when you increase the gate. So when the gate is too high, then it doesn't allow anything to pass through. So just move the gate right underneath the transient of your kick, and that will trigger the texture. So that gives you a lot of creative control over how you trigger the sound. Now, of course, you can play with the other envelope functions such as the attack or hold. That's interesting. That could be useful for some more minimal types of drum and bass. This kind of reminds me of what Alex Perez does in some of his tracks. Now you can apply some LFO and envelope modulation to the sound. We'll get into this later on. You can also EQ the texture. And then you can EQ the original sound as well. Then over on the right here, you can adjust the mix between the dry and wet. As well as the gain. So I just tweaked it a little more with another preset I have called the Stranger kick. And this is my kick. Once again, I like how it adds a little bit of ambiance and character to your kick without making it sound muddy. So this is a useful tool as opposed to using reverb on your kick, which could potentially make your kick sound muddy. Now here's another cool feature. So I added a hi-hat just at the beginning of the kick loop. So you can use the sidechain function and filter it to only cache the high frequencies. Or you can move it up a bit so it's a lot more pronounced on the hi-hat and there's still a bit during the kick. So this is a neat creative option. So here's a snare just playing a regular two-step pattern, and the snare is from the Vitae Lupus snare pack if you're interested. So let's add some texture over the snare. So I found this one, Rise and Transform. Let's possibly EQ it a bit. Now there's this color knob. It just changes the timbre of the sound, so this is quite useful. Again, I like how it makes the snare sound a little more interesting, adds this characteristic to it. So it's not just a normal snare, there's a bit more air to it. Okay, so now I have this hi-hat layer, and again, it's just a straight hi-hat. This time in texture, we're going to import a sample into the sampler. Now I have this clap sample here. Now with the sampler, you have an additional compress knob so we can compress the sound. And this time, let's enable the granular synthesis under the sampler. Essentially what granular synthesis does is it takes smaller sample snippets and manipulates it to create a new sound. So decreasing the sample size or the grain size and then moving the range over. And then you can use these additional controls to randomize the granular synthesis. Let's EQ it, add a high pass to it. So this adds a little more to the hi-hats, makes something interesting happening. This is probably more useful for more experimental sounds where you have some weird hi-hats, but this kind of works, so let's just stick with it and see how it turns out. So here's our drums without any texture. And here's the kick and snare with texture. So it definitely makes the sound a bit sweeter with the additional layers. Here's a think break shaker. Now we're going to use texture to almost create a new shaker. So under the percussion, you have these percussive layers. So let's try the tambourine. So this is the original shaker. Then move the mix over. So this is the new one created with texture, using its samples and triggering it. So this is a neat way to create new shaker loops. Now we can try the other layers. So I like the shaker plastic layer. And we can play with the gate a little to control how it sounds. And then we can bring the mix back to mix in some of the original shaker. So I really like this feature. I've been using the Think Break forever now. It is really only one Think Break, and they generally all sound the same aside from some EQing and processing. But with this plugin, you can essentially make an infinite variety of Think Break shakers just by patching it to different textures and then adjusting the modulation parameters. So this is the original, and this is the new one. Let's hear it with the beat. Yeah, so that's sounding pretty funky. Hey, I just want to let you guys know I have a new track out. I did a remix of my friend Tier Kahoot and Anastasia's track Schema. It's out on my label Deviant Audio, and you can stream it on all your favorite platforms. Also, last week we put out Johnny's The Bees EP, which is an amazing EP of dubstep, halftime, and jungle numbers. So you can check it all out in the link below. So another useful application with Texture is to apply sub-frequencies to a sound. So I have this trumpet layer here. Now it'd be amazing if you can layer it with some sub so that when that trumpet step hits, there's more impact. So we can do precisely this in Texture. Just go into the library, and under the bass sounds, I'm going to choose deep. So that's probably a sine bass. Now we're going to have to adjust the hold of the note. Now, one thing about this is, unfortunately, there's no key tracking. So it only plays one note, no matter what note you hit on the keyboard. Now, I have reached out to the development team, and hopefully they include an update for key mapping so it syncs the texture to the key that you're playing. So to correct this, I do know that my trumpet is playing an F note, and this bass note I looked up earlier is playing an A, so we can just bring it down by 4 notes and it should match up with the trumpet. That's sounding much better. Alright, so next I have this wobble bass sound. So let's make it a little more interesting with some texture. So in a lot of modern drum and bass, we like to layer our bass sounds with noise to give it a little more grit. So texture is a nice tool to do this with. So under the basic noises, you can find a bunch of different noise sounds. I'm using the static sound. Now under the EQ, I've just high passed it and boosted the mids a little bit. So notice how this adds a little more grit to the bass. Another thing that's cool about Texture is notice how the noise follows the envelope shape of the wobble. So as the bass wobbles in and out, that noise also goes in and out. So this is really neat. So let's browse through the different noises. So these paper crumble textures add something interesting to your bass too. Actually, I've noticed that Neurosounds does that a lot. They take what we call Foley sounds, which is sound effects of like paper crackling or stuff like that, and they layer it with the bass. And I've seen that done a lot in that genre. So this is how you can do it with Texture. Alright, so I have one more bass sound to play with. I have this Screech bass here. So this time let's add some of the Foley sounds on top of this bass. I think some of the water sounds might be cool. So we can filter the sounds and we can use the LFO and make it an 8-bar LFO. And as it moves up this triangle, we can increase the cutoff. Perhaps add a high pass. Let's try the other sounds. So this is a windy cave sample, and we're filtering it out. That seems nice. I have this tape noise. This is cool. So what I'm doing here is I'm also smashing the signal of Devious, so this kind of glues the sound together with the bass. So this is without it. This adds a little bit of something extra to that sound to make that listener question, what is that? All right, so I have this vocal loop here.
Drop the bass, 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 bass.
So another technique, I learned this from Pensado, is that you can layer different sounds with noise to kind of bring it out in the mix. So once I've enabled texture,
drop the bass, 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 bass.
Notice how that makes that vocal kind of come out a little more. There's more of a sparkle to the vocal.
Drop the bass.
Then I can just add some echo to this sound.
Drop the bass, 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 bass.
Okay, so we apply texture to the kick, snare, hi-hat, as well as the shaker, trumpet, the wobble, screech bass, and vocal. So we've pretty much applied it to every sound in this track to make it come alive. So now let's get to what we've been all waiting for. Let's hear how this sounds in the drop. So let's go back and see how this sounds without any texture at all. So this is the first track that I've ever applied texture to, and I have to admit, I really do like the results. It really brings the track alive. As you can see, with the sounds dry, the track just sounds a bit flat and uninteresting. But with texture on all the layers, the track suddenly comes alive and everything sounds a lot more full and complete. So I could really see myself using this tool a lot more in my process. I can see it open up some creative possibilities and make my drums sound a little more interesting. So comment down below and let me know what you guys think of this tool. Do you think it's useful? Would you use it? How would you use it? Alright, so I hope you guys enjoyed watching my process using texture on a variety of sounds. And as you can see, it's a neat creative tool to open up new possibilities and make certain sounds more interesting. And once again, if you're interested in using texture, you can grab it down in the link below. There's also a nice discount just for you guys. Alright, that's pretty much it for today, guys. Thanks for watching. Keep practicing, and I'll see you at the next video.